Okay, so we completed all the multi-hour configuration. After that, we completed HRMS, inventory, and purchasing setups. Okay, so just we're done with the setups. We'll see the process flow. Before that, accounts payables. Okay, we'll try to understand what is the purpose of accounts payables, what are the different type of invoices and payments can be recorded, what are the other points we have to understand from payables. We'll try to understand theoretically first, then we can start working on the system after completing the payables configuration. Okay, so let's talk about payables. So along with the payables, what we'll do is we discussed a few points here, right? So matching types and receipt routing methods, and what are the other points we have to understand when we are working on payables. Means when you are working on payables, these matching options are will be just we have to use will be using to create invoices. Okay, and there are some other key points also to understand. We'll talk about it. Okay, now we'll talk about accounts payables. So Oracle accounts payable, short name is AP. Oracle accounts payables. Fine. So what is the use of accounts payable? What is the meaning of accounts payables? What is the term meaning? No, what term meaning? English term meaning I am asking. We'll talk about complete functionality. What is the meaning of accounts payable in accounting point of view? It's a liability. It says somebody is liable to others. If you take company, if a company, if you say accounts payables, they are liable to pay some amount to definitely to vendors, suppliers, right? So whatever. Sometimes it can be to employees also, depending on the process. Now, already we discussed a few points when we talk about P2P cycle. We discussed what primary transactions we can record in accounts payables. What are the primary transactions we can record in the payables? What you are talking? Sales invoice, purchase invoice. Purchase invoice, right? Payables and all, how sales, how you can bring into this, how you can change the all companies' business processes. Okay, so we can record the purchase invoice and we can process the payment. Primarily, these are the two tasks, major transactions we can record in the accounts payables. The high level, simple point. What is use of accounts payables? Just to answer in very simplest way and summarize, we can say, with the help of accounts payables, we can maintain the supplier outstanding balances. Just you can make a note. What is the purpose of accounts payables? To maintain the supplier outstanding balances. Supplier outstanding means not like supplier has to pay us. Whatever we have to pay to the supplier, that outstanding. Okay. Fine. With the help of accounts payables, we can maintain the supplier outstanding balances. In other words, simply you can say we can maintain the liability information. Whatever we have to pay to the supplier, anyone, that we call as liability. That's all. And when you look into detail level, when you maintain the supplier liability, definitely you have to make the payment, right? So payments also can be processed from accounts payables. Okay. So primarily what we do, we'll be discussing about invoices and payments. I'm just writing invoices and payment. That means we have a different type of invoices and payables and different type of payments also. We'll discuss the detail level. We'll try to understand which scenario, which invoice type we will be using, and what are the different type of payments we have, and what is the purpose, how that can be processed. Everything we'll be discussing. Okay, fine. So before we get into this, okay, before we get into that, how invoices can be, what are the type of invoice and payments, we'll try to understand few points. So let's talk about invoice creation. I am taking this point in the very generic way. I am not directly referring from our application. Very generic in business point of view. What do you say? Like how to create invoice? What invoice will consist of? What information you can see as a part of invoice? Tell me.
Supplier details.
Okay, good.
Purchase order.
I'll take it one by one. Supplier information. Supplier information should be there as a part of invoice. And one more point here, we are talking about invoice. The invoices simply you can call as invoices, or you can call it as purchase invoices, or you can say supplier invoice also. All are same. Means the invoice always will get from supplier, right? When you purchase some goods or when you render some services, supplier will be giving invoice to us. That will maintain our payables, okay, as a record, how much we have to pay to the supplier and when we have to pay, where we have to pay. So that is the reason you can call it as supplier invoice. All are same. All are same. Supplier invoice or purchase invoice or just invoice, or you may call as AP invoice. But generally that we don't use as AP invoice here invoices. Simply we call as purchase invoice or supplier invoice, or you can call as vendor invoice. Vendor. So more business term is vendor, right? Done. All are same. Okay. Now when you talk about this invoices, okay, any invoice, so what information basically will be keeping as a part of invoice? Tell me. One is supplier
Due date of payment.
due date,
Product information.
due date,
Incoming of product.
product,
Amount.
amount. Tell me amount. Yeah, somebody is saying invoice number.
Type of invoice.
If somebody from a previous batch, if anybody is here from previous batch, I request them not to answer anything. Okay. Invoice number,
Tax invoice. Which type of invoice?
tax details if applicable, right? Yes. Then
Quantity.
okay, quantity.
Authorized.
Hmm.
Authorized signature and authorized person.
Okay. Yeah, that details also agree, but I'm not taking here.
Supplier and receiver details.
Supplier,
Supplier details and receiver details.
supplier and receiver. Receivers mean
Purchase.
supplier is who and owner is who. Just different. Fine. Okay, maybe valid, but not required for us now. Then what else?
Type of invoice.
Type of invoice. I'm not talking about types now, please. I'm just talking about. I didn't say any invoice type, right? Just when you are creating invoice, what information you think we should have as a part of invoice to have a very proper information. When you get invoice from the supplier, supplier has to give all the information. Or else when we are maintaining our system, we have to maintain very proper way. Then what else?
Delivery address.
Sorry,
Delivery address.
delivery address. What delivery address? It's not purchase order. It's invoice. Address. When you say address, there should be address where we have to send the payment. So payment address. Right? Right. Otherwise, supplier is ABC. Where will be sending the payment? Right. That should be there. Okay. Then what else? Okay. Well, other points. Just let me mention few points. Yes, everything is correct. Everything is correct. Okay. Whatever you given, everything is correct. The same I am going to reframe here. Okay. Basically, we'll have a supplier who is a supplier, and the other point is supplier address and invoice date, invoice amount, yeah, invoice number and terms. As you said, due date, that we call it terms. Within the terms you can have like when we have to pay, and if you pay early, whether supplier will offer the discount or not, everything you can find within the terms. And terms we have, and how we are going to make the payment, that we call as payment method. What is the channel we are going to pay, through check or cash or electronic? Okay, that we have to mention. That is nothing but payment terms. Okay, fine. You just given some other inputs also. Yes, all are valid. Okay, Now just let's take these points. You given some item or product, that information also, yes, we can have as a part of that, but primarily that information is maintained by purchasing. When you are creating invoice based on that, that information also will flow here. Okay, that also will be seeing, but let's take these few points. Okay, we'll be mentioning who is the supplier and who's the supplier, where we have to pay, where we have to send the payment, what is the invoice date, and how much we have to pay, and what is invoice number, and what are the terms. Okay, terms is when we have to pay, right? Terms means through terms only we can get the due date. Within that you can see the due date means when we have to pay. Payment terms means how to pay. Okay, fine, that's all. So this is a very primary information which we can keep as a part of invoice. There are some other details also you'll be understanding in further classes. You have to give specify this invoice against which PO, purchase order, and which receipt. That there will be some other information, but now initially what base we are going to create invoice, on that base I am explaining. In further classes you'll come to know everything. Okay, so for now this information is enough. Okay, when you talk about supplier, already we discussed. When you talk about supplier, already we discussed. We created supplier when you are doing the status for immediate answer. Some people are thinking purchasing. When we did some setups for purchasing, we discussed about purchasing supplier, how supplier can be managed. If I create supplier, the supplier will be available in one operating unit or two operating unit. Two, right? You should say number, that will be wrong answer. We discussed. Okay, it's a supplier is not specific to operating unit. If you create supplier, it will be supplier will be available in all operating units. Supplier information is global. You are not going to create any supplier within the operating unit. You should stand on those points. If you are going in your own ways, something else, it won't work. Please, that is the reason I'm explaining. Otherwise there is no meaning if I'm explaining if you are not interested. Okay, so supplier information is global. Supplier is not specific to any operating unit. If you create the supplier in the system, you can find the supplier from any operating unit. That means supplier information is global. Now let's talk about address. Okay, address, the same address or business term is site. Generally we'll be calling as site. So address means very layman language, right? So we call as site. Site is nothing but supplier address. Okay, supplier address. So why address is required? When we are dealing with the supplier, we should know we have to contact which site for different purposes. What are the purposes? Already we discussed. What are the purposes? Site can have purpose of purchasing or RFQ or payment. So when you are creating the invoice, definitely you should take the site, which site we are through which site we are going to send the payment. We have to make the payment. There will be separate address. That address we have to take as a site. Site can be used in how many operating unit? One site only. Only means you will be staying one only. That is not correct. Already we discussed. I don't know what is this great logic. We clearly discussed, right? If I say only means, then answer is default. Is coming from financial options or which options? Okay, only means nothing, not valid, right? So site is specific to which operating you are assigning for all those. It's a specific, but you have to take the decision. You can create the site outside of the operating unit. The same site can be accessed by how many operating units to record the transactions against the supplier you can assign. I take an example also. Hyderabad, Bangalore, here, there I explained, but no use. Okay, maybe there may be some use for some people. And done. Okay, that's how we can do that. So that is the reason I'm requesting, please give presentations. Please give present. First take the points, read it, and have a presentation and do practice. Then everything will be fine. If I say one, you will be laughing. Only means you will be laughing. No, boss, only not. It's specific. You can decide how many. If I say only, if you are answering, not in proper track. Then okay, address will be treating here as a site, and every site will have a specific purpose. You may see one site which got different purposes also, right? Supplier may inform us, okay, if you are going to send purchase order, if you are going to make the payment, we have only one office in Hyderabad, that to high-tech city. You have to place the orders to that location, as well as payments also you have to remit to same location. In that case only one site will be using. Otherwise for payment only, supplier can have multiple sites in the same way, and POs supplier can have multiple sites. For RFQ, supplier can have multiple sites.
That depending on how what you are dealing accordingly will be creating. But first point, you have to understand how these things can be handled in the system. That's very, very important. Okay, if you know how to create supplier and how to create site, how to create invoice, it's not a great job. Everyone can learn and do it. Understanding what are the limitations we have in the system, okay, how best we can offer the solution to the client, that's very important. Those you can come up if you know these kind of points only. If you're not answering, that's a different thing. If you're answering, you are okay. Okay, fine, done. Clear, right? Supplier is global information. You are not creating the supplier within the operating net. Outside of the operating, you will create, that will be available for any OU. And when you create, talk about site also we are not going to create for specific operating net. That also will create outside of the OU, but that is available to assign to multiple OUs. Okay, if you want to create invoice, minimum one pay site is required. Pay site is nothing but payment, means you created one site, you selected purchasing site. Purposes we discuss, right? Purposes: purchasing, payment, RFQ. We have different purposes. Say you created supplier, and in purchasing setups, what are the purposes we selected for supplier? We created supplier and site, right? What purposes we selected? Payment, purchasing, and what RFQ? And means you are adding purchasing and payment only. Please, that's what I am expecting. No preparation at all. Purchasing and payment only. Okay, purchasing and payment only we enable. Now if I don't enable as a payment, the supplier won't be available. The supplier inside I cannot see from payables. That means to create invoice, minimum we should have one pay site. Normally payment, the term they given as a pay means payment. So okay, minimum there should be one pay site or payment site, you can call, nothing wrong. You create a supplier and site is not coming, means you have to go and verify payment is enabled. I have one supplier and I am creating the purchase order, the supplier information is not coming. What could be a reason? Sorry, purchasing options means purchasing options are different, right?
Purchase is disabled.
Tell me proper term. Correct, you are right. Purchasing checkbox is not enabled. Simple. I'm not saying what you said wrong, but say in proper way. Okay. So supplier site level, if you don't set site purpose as a purchasing, let's say in this way then. Okay. The supplier site level, if you don't enable purchasing as the site as purchasing site, it won't come at the time of again pay. You are saying purchasing invoice creation time, purchase order creation time. Even I am diverting from my suggestion your answers. Okay, that's it. It's all about you are giving the permission for the site to use where. It's simple. If you enable in purchasing, it will be available in the purchase order creation. If you enable payment, it will be available in payables to make the payment. To make the payment, before that you have to create invoice, right? So if you don't enable, you cannot create invoice also. These points are very, very important. So invoice date, it's a simple. The invoice date can be decided by, I mean they'll decide normally what are will get a soft copy or hard copy from the supplier. So what are the copy will be getting from supplier, on that what are the number you have, you may mention. Sometimes on which date they are recording the invoice, the same date they may take as a invoice date, nothing but system date or current date companies will be using. And invoice amount, okay, we have to mention invoice amount. When you are getting invoice, we have to mention invoice amount. When you talk about invoice amount, say for example we got invoice with 10,000 rupees. 10,000. Do you enter directly or do you go with some specifications? What are the specifications? Add the tax. Yes, correct. Some details. Do you just enter direct amount 10,000 or you generally see invoices? Yeah, you will go with the detailed information like what you purchase, what exactly and all. Generally, those all you can simple way to discuss. You can represent with the accounts. The 10,000, what is the purpose? Why 10,000? So there you have to specify. You will be giving the account. When you say account, code combination, always remember. Say there may be something you spend some travel expense. Just for example, I'm taking travel expense. So out of 10,000, say 8,000, and some food expense 1,000, some other miscellaneous expense 10,000. If you have invoice with the 10,000, why the 10,000? The amount should hit to which account? That specification you have to do. Okay. So otherwise, just take something. You spend some admin expense. You got invoice with the 5,000. Maybe internally whatever. So admin expense, say 3,000, and other expenses, say okay. Advertisement expense, just advertisement expense, ad expense. Okay, that means advertisement. Maybe it's 2,000. So this is how just you have to specify. When we are creating any invoice, we'll be given the invoice amount, but the invoice amount is belongs to what exactly? Or else you purchase some stationery. Whatever you buy from the supplier, accordingly you have to mention very detailed level, so that why that amount you can understand. Again, that out of total amount, whatever you are mentioned, 10 or 5, that exactly it belongs to which account, so that you can have a better reporting. Easily you can track each and everything detail level. So when you are entering the invoice amount, what you have to do, that amount you have to distribute across the different accounts. Simple. So the invoice amount we have to maintain against the relevant accounts. This we call as, if you are going to specify the invoice amount across the different accounts where the amount is belongs to, that we call as invoice distribution. What we call invoice distribution. In every invoice, what we have to do, we have to have a invoice distribution. Okay. The invoice amount we have to distribute. Simple. Invoice amount we have to distribute across the different accounts. Here I given travel expense only, but when we talk about the actual process in the system, which company, right, which department or cost center, and the account is travel expense, and which location or etc. Detail I will be mentioning. Okay, so this is the point you have to understand. When you create invoice, we'll give the invoice amount. The invoice amount should be distributed across the different accounts. Say a simple example, invoice amount is 8,000. The total invoice amount is belongs to expense, travel expense only. In that case also you have to specify that only we call as invoice distribution. It can be one account or multiple account. The amount is belongs to what you have to specify. That only we call as invoice distribution. Okay. Okay, invoice distribution. Fine, done. Okay. So now what we have to do, whatever the amount you are giving, that amount will be selecting travel expense 8,000, food expense 1,000, miscellaneous expense 1,000. You will be selecting. Think one simple case. Think like this expense you will be getting in every month. Take simple example. Every month or very often. Okay. In that case, take the simple example. You will be getting some amount, out of that 80% goes to travel expense. And just I am giving example. This logic can be applicable with a real-time case, whatever you will be facing. Take example. Always 80% goes to travel, 10% food, miscellaneous expense 10 are allowed by company or whatever. Just simple case. Okay, that means whenever you create invoice, whatever the amount 80% should goes to travel, 10% to food, and 10% to miscellaneous. That means always fixed. In that case, what you can do is, instead of giving, because if it is 10,000, this is how it will work, right? If it is 20,000, 16,000. So instead of giving amount, what I can give is 80 percentage. I'll say
10%.
here.
10%.
I'll say 10%,
10%.
and here also I'll say 10%. Now you may spend 1,000 rupees. The 1,000 out of 1,000, 80% is belongs to travel. Yes, automatic system will take 800. And food 10%, if you specify, if that is fixed in the sense, it will take 100, and again miscellaneous expense 100. If I enter 1 lakh, 80,000, 10,000, 10,000. Means if you are dealing with some expense, or if you are dealing with some purchases, it can be expense or purchase, anything. Whatever the transaction you are doing, whatever the transaction you are going to record in the through purchase invoice, the expense or whatever the amounts you want to distribute across the fixed accounts with the fixed percentage. Okay. So for that we can automate it. So let me take simple example. So this I taken for example. So something you are going to conduct some camp. Okay, marketing campaign or something you are going to conduct. In this case, think these are the expense. Company has a budget Travel will allow 80% because you have to go very far distances. That is reason 80. Food will accept 10% only, and this is like just 10% means they'll be giving some amount. They'll be giving some amount in the ratio 80 to travel, 10 to food and all. Based on the teams and campaigns, they may give 1 lakh, 2 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs. Doesn't matter. Okay, this is a case. And if I take the same case, so this is one type of campaigns. Another type of campaigns is say something like IT campaigns and all, and companies conducting. Yes, there also any campaign, the travel, food, and the miscellaneous. Take example. So here, companies sometimes what they'll do is for this much amount, fixed amount. I mean fixed percentage and all. Some cases we know if you are conducting this IT campaign and something else, travel expense will be there, and food expense also will be there, and some other miscellaneous expense are there, but there may not be chance where they can fix for what, how much percentage it has to be allocated, how much they may get as a outcome of that campaign execution. So in that case we are very sure out of that campaign will get travel, food and miscellaneous expense, but we are not sure on percentage. We are not sure, we don't know percentage. So when you are spending something, this is how companies will be having some experience where always the amounts will belongs to the total amount they should allocate with a fixed percentage across the different accounts. Sometimes they are very sure how much. Say for example, takes as an example I am taking, say company is purchasing some plant. When they are purchasing, or else say company is purchasing laptop. Of course laptops comes under asset and all, that forget about it, just for example I am taking. Whenever they purchase Dell laptop, take simple example, 95% goes to, or 90% goes to, no item, 90%. Travel 90% means we will buy. Right, 90% for item. So simple example, 5% for travel, okay, 5% tax. Say this is fixed. Very frequently they are purchasing laptops. In that case they can set this kind of logic, right? They'll put here laptop 80%, 90%, travel, freight, travel generally we call as freight 5%, and tax 5%, or else tax 3%, and other miscellaneous expense or some packing or courier, etc., 2%. That's how they can fix. Anytime they buy, same. Okay, whatever it may be, laptop maybe 20 or 40 or 1 lakh, but ratio is fixed, almost fixed. If that case, if company is facing, what they do, they'll keep like this. They'll prepare like this, expense how much amount, food expense how much, or something, whatever they are dealing, according they'll fix it. And there will be some cases they may not be aware of it. Okay, sometimes it will be fluctuating, right? It will be fixed, but until unless they get the invoice and all, they don't know, but they are very sure there will be different type of expense. The expense also fixed. Say for example they are buying some vehicle. Okay, vehicle cost may be fixed, the rest of may not be fixed. That is the reason all they'll go with the open option. So once they get the invoice and all, then only they'll be entering the amounts, but they are very sure. Okay, the tax how much, some labor cost how much, labor cost will be there, and item cost, plant cost would be there, and transportation, freight charges will be there, other expense also will be there. The 4 expenses are fixed for example, but they are not very sure about the total cost they want to take into which account, how much percentage, until unless they will get the invoice. That is the reason what companies will do is that they can maintain this kind of presentation, which account how much percentage they can take it. And another way is without giving any percentage they can maintain the system. Now what I'll do is I'll create invoice here, I'll give 1000, enter 1000, the 1000 say it belongs to this campaign distribution. Simply what I'll do, this campaign distribution I'll select in this invoice, then automatically system will distribute this 1000 to across these 3 accounts by following this percentage. Take example, I'm creating the invoice, I taken this 1000, okay, and I'll be using this IT campaign distribution. If I use here, what happens, how much it will take for travel expense, how much is there, some amount you can say, no, right, you cannot say. The reason we didn't specify.
Invoice, after seeing invoice.
Okay, if you if you take this IT distribution campaign, within this what we have? Accounts it will take, and it cannot take for which account how much amount. In that case, what we have to enter amount. What is the advantage of this? What is the advantage of this? You have to catch and tell.
Entering the bulk.
Expenses can vary, sir.
No. What is the advantage of this? Time saving. You don't need to enter 3 accounts, right? If I use this IT distribution camp, IT camp distribution to invoice, I don't need to enter 3 accounts, right? Otherwise, I have to enter the 3 account code combinations, right? If I am going to keep ready in this, I no need to enter. What is the advantage of this? I no need to enter anything. Here, at least I have to enter amount. Means I have to enter. Account system is taking, and we have to enter the amount. And in this case, account and amount system is taking. Okay, no issues. If these two are not there, what we have to do? We have to manually we have to enter which account, how much? I don't say percentages, amount, right? So how much amount and which account? This both you have to enter manually to reduce our burden and to simplify the process and to avoid the mistakes. If you give a chance to users, if you have to enter 10 accounts, one account definitely they'll take their own account, right? So that is the reason we should not take the risk by giving this chance. So this has to be automated in the system. For that, so if you are going to do like this okay, for to do this kind of activities in the system means if you have a requirement, to distribute invoice amount across the accounts with percentage, with a fixed percentage or without percentage. With percentage means amount it will be distributed, otherwise it will take at least accounts. Okay, simple point. To distribute the invoice amount automatically across the accounts, we use distribution set concept. Take the point. Let me write here. Below whatever I mentioned, those comes under distribution sets. With the help of distribution set, we can distribute the invoice amount automatically across the different accounts. Simple, in a very simple way, you may take with the distribution set, we can distribute the invoice amount. The distribution set, we can you have to take all the points. If you are understanding, it's not enough. You have to read and you have to remember. You should be able to present to others. Okay, with the distribution set, we can distribute the invoice amount automatically. The term is very important. Automatically. With the help of distribution set, we can distribute the invoice amount automatically. You can add an additional point also across the accounts only. That's definitely accounts only, but if you can include or without including also, you can give the definition for distribution set. Okay. With the help of distribution set, we can distribute the invoice amount automatically across the accounts. When you are working real time, every invoice there will be a number of accounts. There will be some amount, say 50,000. The 50,000 amount maybe belongs to many accounts. So company is buying some some assembling items and all. Okay, in that case, assembling items means there will be a number of items, right? The total amount may be something like 50,000. For 50,000 maybe belongs to 10 or 20 type of items. So for each item there will be separate account. That's how you can mention within the invoice. So to automate that, what you can do, you can use the distribution set. Okay, if account and amount is fixed, account and one case is account and some percentage is fixed. Okay, other cases only account is fixed. We are not sure about how much percent total invoice amount we have to take into how much percentage for each account if you don't know. Okay, this is how you can maintain. Now we have a two type of distribution sets, right? This is one type of distribution set. This is another type. In this case, what we are doing? Account and percentage. Amount, don't say amount, percentage. Okay, if account and percentage is fixed, that type of distribution set you call as full distribution set. Make a note. Type. Okay. If you have a distribution set where account and percentage is fixed, that we call as full distribution set. Here what is missing? Amount, not percentage, means partial, right? Partial distribution set. So simply we call it skeleton distribution set. Finally, we have two type of distribution sets. Okay, we have two type of distribution sets: full distribution set and skeleton distribution set. Okay, full distribution set and skeleton distribution set. See here, 3 points we have to understand. First point is what is the meaning of distribution set? What is the use of distribution set? With the help of distribution set, we can distribute the invoice amount. That's enough. Or else, if you go with other additional framing as a additional point, also if you want to add, you can say the distribution set we can distribute the invoice amount automatically across the various accounts. That's it. Okay, anything you can say. Simply you can say like to distribute the invoice amount automatically, use distribution set. Again, we have two type of distributions. What do you mean by full distribution set? In case of in case of full distribution set, we can maintain the account and the percentage. And in case of skeleton, we can just have a account only. When you are not sure about percentage, will be mentioning only account. In that case, that we call as skeleton distribution set. So you may create full or skeleton, whatever it may be. When you are creating invoice, within the invoice, you will be selecting the distribution set. What are the amount you have that will be distributed automatically if you use full. And if you use skeleton, at least system will take the default the accounts. Amount manual will be entering, you will be completing the process of invoice creation. Okay, we'll be completing the process of invoice creation. Fine, done. So clear, right? That's all about invoice amount. When we talk about invoice amount, this is what we have to understand. The next one is invoice number. Okay, these are very primary elements. When you are creating invoice, these are very important. That's the reason we are focusing on this more. So invoice number. Okay, so invoice number means it should not be like you will be entering what are the number, your favorite number or whatever. Always we have to follow the number which we received from supplier. Because supplier will be sending the invoice. Whatever the number we have in that invoice, the same number we have to enter in the system. If you don't enter, what happens? Sorry? No, based on invoice number, we are not going to match or we are not going to verify. Sorry? No, there is no relation between the. Just see, always number for identification, right? Number for identification purpose, that's all. You don't go into some core process. Just number is for identification. I can give any number. We can complete the invoice. Invoice can be created. What is the issue you think? You cannot? You cannot? No, you can find the supplier also. You can give wrong number and you can give. Only the issue is, when you are creating, you can create and everything you can do. If you have some issue with that invoice, you will be calling to the supplier. Supplier says, tell me invoice number. Reference will be missing. That is the reason invoice number we have to use same whatever we get from supplier. Other information also we have to use same whatever we get, but very major focus would be invoice number. Okay. So because in future if you communicate with the supplier related to that issues and all, or else if supplier is calling, please process the payment to 123 invoice, means you may not find 123 because you written 789 something else. So that is the reason invoice number we should take as is. That's very important point. Remember. And terms. So terms, normal terms would be when we have to pay, like we'll be agreeing with the supplier, and we discussed in the PO before PO quotation only we'll be getting all the terms. Okay. So when you get invoice, within that invoice also supplier will be mentioning all the terms. Here terms means two type of terms will be there. One is payment terms, other one is discount terms. Supplier says you have to pay within 1 month. It's a simple example. within the terms we are finding, one is payment related terms, other terms are discount related terms. Supplier is saying you have to pay within 30 days. That's all about payment term. Within that, we'll be having one more other terms you may have. It's not mandatory. All suppliers may not give discount, right? So supplier is saying pay within 30 days. That is a mutually agreed, and we have to pay 30 days. And again, supplier is offering the discount. If you pay within 1 week, I'll give you 10% discount. If you pay within 1 week instead of 30 days. Okay. If you pay within 10 days, I'll give you 5%. If you pay within 20 days instead of 30, you'll get say 2% discount. That's how suppliers can offer us. So that information also you can maintain within the terms only. So that means payment terms are there and discount terms are there. Both we can maintain within the payment terms. To maintain all these, we'll be having concept called as payment terms. Take simple point here. With the help of payment terms, we can calculate the due date and discount. Okay, with the help of payment terms, okay, with payment terms we can calculate the due date. With the help of payment terms we can calculate the due date and discount, because we'll be mentioning everything in that. How payment terms can be created in the system. Say I'll create one payment term called as say 30 days, and I'm creating this invoice. I'll be mentioning the payment term called as 30 days, just name only that. So 30 days I given. If I take this invoice now, 30 days means when? Sorry? Okay, you can say one date, no issues. Yeah, this is December 8th. Okay. On what basis you are saying December 8th? My payment terms are 30 days. Just you are telling due date is December 8th. Yes, I agree. But tell me how. Current date. Yeah, that point is important. That should be calculated from which date. For that there will be some other parameters. Okay. Because you are creating today means it should not be from today, right? There will be terms. Some supplier says, whenever I print the invoice, from the date onwards you have to count. Reason I'll be printing whenever I delivered. Some suppliers may agree with us. Whenever you receive, you can start counting 30 days so that there will be speed up their process. And some customers, when you talk about payables, let's treat ourselves, we are the customers. Let's be in customer side so easily we can understand. So when we are purchasing, payables means we are acting as a customer. Okay. So being a customer, you may ask supplier saying that, okay, give me 30 days minimum payment terms, give me 30 days time, but I'll be counting the 30 days, okay, whenever I receive the material. Okay, there will be different conditions, and there will be mutually agreed. So based on that, so that when we will be having the payment term with 30 days, but 30 days means directly not so and so date from the date. So from which date the 30 days need to be calculated, we have to set in the system that we call generally term based. That don't take it now. I'll explain you once again when you are doing it. Okay, from that date, I am creating invoice today, but I'll be mentioning the term date as a first of this month, because I am late. Actually, I have to enter last week only, 10 days back only, but I am entering today. If I am entering today, supplier has to count 30 days from now. In that case, nobody will enter invoices, right? Everybody will be entering in the future. So from the date to 30 days means. It always that depends, like based on invoice printing date or invoice receiving date or goods received date, or there will be a number of terms that we can set it up. I'll show you in the system. Okay. So that means that is the meaning of that. Payment time I have 30 days. This 30 days means when exactly due date, that will be calculated with the help of term date, but ultimately this 30 days, based on this 30 days only, the due date will be calculated. So that is the reason simply we call as payment term for the purpose of calculating the due date. Within this 30 days payment term, say supplier is given the discount, 10% discount if you pay within say 5 days within the payment term. So when I'm making the payment for this 30 days, I got invoice. Okay, I'm paying today because I want to get 10% discount. If I pay, since this discount term is there within the payment term, the discount also will get calculated. If I have to pay 10,000, Okay, 10% I'll get discount. Only have to pay 9,000. That means that is use of payment terms. Okay, we'll be creating the payment terms. Then you can understand more than this. Okay, so for now, simple point is, okay, we'll use the payment terms to calculate the due dates and the discounts. And if you give payment terms like 10 days or 20 days or 30 days, the 10 or 20, 30 days, there will be some rule from where it has to start. And based on that only due date will get calculated. Clear, right? Done. Okay. So then that's all about payment terms and the payment. Okay, sorry. Payment terms, not payment methods. We discussed the methods only, written terms. You taken the same, huh? Okay, fine. No issues. We can edit it anytime. Correct it. Okay. So payment methods. It's nothing but how you are going to make the payment. Yeah, through check or EFT or any other process. Which process? How you generally process the payments to supplier? Those also we have to specify in the invoice. When you are creating invoice, you have to specify. If you specify some type, say for example, I am specifying the check. And specifying the check. If I specify the check, it's not mandatory. You have to cross through check only. Just as information, you are specifying the check. Future, if you want to pay through electronic process, you will come to the invoice and invoice level will be changing. Payment time, it will accept the same. So just we have to keep the information in the system, so where we can understand, or else that will be useful in the system process. System process means you will be understand. Okay, that we'll discuss. That is automation process and all we have. Okay. So that's all about payment terms. Clear, right? So there are a few more points also, but now since we are not into the application where we are not working, I'm not adding. Okay, the invoices belongs to which operating net, as somebody said. The invoice, what type of invoice that is. That's what I said. Very generic way, generic points we are discussing. Okay, and when you get into the application, there will be other points which you will be understanding. Okay, so this is a very key information when you are creating the invoice. Okay, and how invoices can be created. We discussed about how journal can be created. What is structure for journal? Header and lines. Here also, when you look at the invoice structure, we'll have a header part and lines, distribution. That's it. Take this part. This is the structure of invoice. Header, line, header, lines. Header means only one header will be having. You can have multiple lines, and for each line we can have separate distribution also. Take the term as distribution. So invoice structure means how invoice information can be organized. Okay. Header, lines and distribution. See, most of the points whatever we discussed, almost all the information will be selecting in the header only. Supplier name, supplier site, invoice date, invoice amount and invoice number. Terms means nothing but this we call as payment terms. Payment terms, payment methods, all we can select. We have to track in the header level only. And if at all you are going to distribute this, two ways you can distribute the invoice. One is through manual process. Second option is distribution set. Simply say distribution set. Distribution set means automation. Okay. For every invoice you have to provide the distribution. You may choose manual process. Manual means you have to enter the account and amount. And if you select distribution set, you have to system will distribute. Again within that, which one you are selecting, depending on that you have to work. Okay. So if you are going to use the distribution set, we have to include the distribution set also in the header level. Here you can add the distribution set also, because since we discuss separately, I am not adding here. Okay, so that's what header. And what is the line and distribution? Distribution we discussed, right? Distribution means this is a distribution. Means accounts. Account and amount only we call as distribution. What is the concept of lines and all? We'll talk about it. Let me take simple example. Header I am taking 10,000. Okay, header I am taking 10,000. This 10,000 invoices belongs to two purchase orders. I raise two purchase order to supplier. Okay, I raise purchase order to I raise two purchase order to suppliers. Supplier what he did is For 2 purchase orders, he given only, he delivered the material. Whatever I requested, delivered, but he given only one invoice. One invoice total amount is 10,000. In that case, I'll be taking the header amount as 10,000. Invoice number is same, but POs are different, right? For information purpose, I have to maintain, right? This 10,000 belongs to 2 POs. So for that reason, line 1, I'll take PO1 information. PO1 information, how much? 5,000. Yes. That I'll be entering line level. That means, see, invoice information we are detail level maintained by using the distribution set. Distribution. Before that, if the total amount is belongs to different POs or something else, that level also some summary level distribution we are doing. See here, I'll write. So line number. Okay, lines we discuss, right? Line number 2, maybe for PO2, the amount is 5,000. Now, for each line, I will have a distribution. Okay, for line 1, line 1, PO number 1 related information belongs to some expense account 1, 4,000. Okay, expense account 2, how much? 1,000. This distribution for what? Line 1. And for line 2, again I may have different number or whatever, separate distribution means. So ultimately, whatever the distribution you are doing for invoice, that is for line. Okay. Take simple example. I have only one PO and all. In that case, even if you have one PO, it's mandatory you have to enter the line information. In that case, we will be entering line 1, PO number 1. That we'll discuss in the when a system will see. For your understanding, I am explaining in this way. Okay, PO number 1, 5,000. Invoice order amount also maybe 5,000. In that case, distribution also 1. I mean 5,000 only. Okay, header amount 5,000. Multiple lines means multiple lines. Okay, for the one or multiple lines, for each line we have to maintain separate distribution. Okay, sorry. For each line we have to maintain the separate distribution. Separate distribution means for this line, these two separate for this specific line. That is the meaning of that. Okay, so that's what. Ultimately, what we have to validate is we have to verify it. The distributions, all distributions amount should be equal to total all lines amount, and line amount should be equal to all lines, one or multiple, whatever, depending on case, should be equal to header. That means header line distribution amount should be equal. Otherwise, you cannot process invoice. Just make a note. Okay. Invoice header, line, and distribution should be equal. Whatever you have in the header, okay, the header amount you may take into one or multiple lines, doesn't matter, but it should be equal to header. So, okay, you have 1 or 10 lines, but total distribution for 10 lines or 1 or 10 lines should be equal to lines. All distribution accounts information or lines and distribution lines you can call distribution. All distribution lines information should be equal to invoice lines. Okay, or else let me write here. Invoice header, invoice lines. Here distribution means within the distribution will be having the lines that you can call as distribution lines. When you talk about, we'll use in that way. Otherwise, generally distribution, if you have multiple accounts, those comes under lines only. That means the distribution, total distribution should be equal to all invoice lines, all invoice line information should be equal to invoice header. Otherwise, you cannot process the invoice. That's all. So this is how we'll be creating the invoice. So header level will be taking all this information, right? Just now we discussed. This total information will be taken in the header level. When you talk about line, just now we discussed. Okay. If you are creating the invoice with the PO information and all, in that case, just will be giving the PO number and amount. Automatically system will be taken from purchasing application to here. That will see detail level. Now I don't want to give you confusion. Anyway, we will be discussing, but simple point. Line level we will be entering for each line how much amount. Distribution level, the amount is belongs to which account and all will be entered. That's it. Header level, this total information. Line level, line amount, and distribution level, account and amount for specific line. To specific line. All the lines will be specific to header. That's it. One header only. One invoice means one header. That's it. So this is what we have to understand about invoice structure. Okay, invoice structure. Okay, fine. So this is information base will be taken to create invoice. Okay, and this is the how invoice is structured. And when you are working, I'll be adding few more points. Okay, because you are not required to understand system point of view. Generic process you have to understand. Then whatever we are going to work on the system, it will be well known for us. Okay, so actually when you are creating invoice, will be selecting this belongs to which operating net invoice type. There will be few other optional parameters that we'll see. Okay, no issues. Okay, you have all this information, you create invoice like this. Now next what we have to do, after creating invoice, what we have to do is we have to validate the invoice. Validate, first we have to perform the validation. After creating the invoice, we have to submit for validation. So we know certain things will be submitting for validation to concurrent manager, right? Here also similar process. Every invoice should get validated. What is the meaning of validation? Validation got many purposes, but now in this stage, I don't want to disturb you, confuse you by giving all. We'll come across. But simple point, I'll tell you. I'll create invoice. Just now we discussed one rule. Header, line, and distribution amount should be equal. I'll create invoice. I'm not sure equal or not. I don't want to verify. Simply I'll submit for validation. System will verify. If any header is not equal to, header, line, and distribution, somewhere it is a mismatch, then it will stop. It will place the invoice on hold. It will be holding, stopping. So that's how validation works. Not only this, when we are creating the invoice by matching with the 2-way, 3-way, 4-way, we have to understand those points. Still, we have to discuss. We'll see that. And that process, or many other cases we have where the validation really works and it will support in the system. Okay, that we'll discuss. For now, simple point you can take. When you submit for validation, system will verify header, line, and distribution amount is same or not. Otherwise, it will stop from further process. Okay, first we have to validate the invoice. After validating the invoice, generally, okay, if approvals are applicable, if company is following the approvals, some companies what they do, they'll create invoice and before they making the payment, that has to be approved by somebody. Okay, they may submit for approvals. Say approve. First we will validate the invoice. Once it's validated, then we'll submit for approvals. Then we'll create the accounting. We'll perform the accounting. Okay, we have to validate the invoice. Then we have to approve. Then we'll perform the accounting. We'll create debit and credit. That system will create. We'll understand. But simple point you can take. We have to account it. We have to create accounting entries, or you can say. Okay, we'll perform accounting. Simply, this is how you have to explain. First we'll validate, then we'll approve it. After that we'll account it. We'll account it. Okay, accounting you can do before approve. Also there are different options, but let's take in this way. Once it's accounted, once we arrive at the due date, what we have to do? We have to make the payment. After creating invoice, we'll validate it and approve it, account it, and make the payment. Okay, this is a process generally we follow. Again, here some few other points you have to understand. So for every invoice, validation is mandatory. You have to validate, otherwise you cannot take that invoice for any further process. Because first of all, what are the information entered, that should be proper, right? That's the reason validation is mandatory for every invoice. When you talk about approvals, so it's not mandatory to approve the invoice. If company is following the approvals, they'll approve it. Otherwise, they can ignore it. They can bypass it. And accounting. Yes, accounting is mandatory. Accounting is mandatory because if you don't account it, how you will be generating the reports? How you will be updating that amount against the accounts, whatever you have in the distribution, right? So accounting is mandatory. Payment is mandatory or not? I think not mandatory, right?
Mandatory.
For us, not mandatory. For them, it's a mandatory. So for us, also mandatory. Okay, may not be important for us. For them, important. So we have to make it as important, mandatory. But here, these things are mandatory. Validation is mandatory. Accounting is mandatory. Payment also mandatory. Definitely, these three actions we have to do in the system. We may ignore approval. That depends on the client. Okay. And here, one more point to understand. So to make the payment, let's take simple example. Approvals are not required in the company. Approvals are not required. So we created invoice, we validated. After validating, directly you can make the payment. To make the payment, accounting is not mandatory. Remember, final ultimately accounting is required to generate the reports. But to make the payment, accounting is not mandatory. Just that should be validated. If invoice is validated, directly you can take that invoice for payment. After making the payment or before making the payment, you can perform the accounting. Anytime you can do the accounting, but to make the payment, accounting is not mandatory. That point just remember. Okay. Okay, what is the process of invoice means generally see first we'll create invoice. We'll create invoice or else take other term, we'll import. Means from other systems we may take into AP also, that we'll discuss. We'll create or import. Let me write it this way. We may enter and create or else we'll import invoices. So if you say import, some cases invoice will with validation only it will be imported. Anyway, let's take in this way. Process. What is the process of invoice means? We'll create or we'll import the invoice. Then we have to make sure that that is validated, and if required, we'll do the approvals. Then we'll perform the accounting. Finally, based on the due date, we'll make the payment. That you add the term based on due date. Otherwise, after creating all these, immediately payment only that won't work, right? So we have to follow the due dates, and accordingly we'll make the payments. So here, what are the optional? We can make optional. No, for the overall process, what we can make optional?
Approval.
Can we make creation optional?
No.
Then all are optional only, right? So, right. So what you can ignore it?
Approval.
Approval. Don't say accounting. Okay. Approval you can ignore it. If client don't require, you can ignore it. But temporary purpose you can ignore accounting. Ultimately, you have to account it. To make the payment, accounting is not required. Okay, accounting you can do before or after. These points are very very important. Otherwise, okay, you can say you don't know about invoice processor. If you know how to create, it's not a great thing. These points are important. How to present and what are the conditions and etc. Okay, done. Okay, we are clear on this point, right? If you are okay with this, then we can just get into the discussion of what are the different type of invoices we have, what is the purpose we'll discuss. After that we'll be discussing about payment types and all. Okay, fine, done. So okay, fine. So what we'll do is first we'll talk about just it's all about whatever we discussed, just very high level overview. Okay, in the same way, simple point, when you are making the payment, there's no much information in this. You're making the payment, to whom you are paying, supplier name should be there, how much you are paying, for which invoice you are making the payment, everything will be selecting. Along with that, just we'll be selecting the bank accounts information. As a part of banking information, we'll have check number if it's a payment method is check and all. Okay, that's it. Okay. So payment methods also, we have different type of payment methods and all that we'll discuss when you're working. Okay, payment time I'll explain. So from payables, what we are going to learn high level, I'll just give you the few bullet points. Once I'm done with that, I'll take you through invoice types. Okay, first we'll understand invoice types. Okay, and the payment types. So basic process is invoicing and payment only, right, in payables. So that will be covering. After that, we have many other concepts other than invoice types. We have many other features in the payables that all will discuss. Concepts, many other means business cases, business scenarios, AP concepts, many other concepts we have. Once we're done with that, we'll talk about accounting entries. Means when you create so and so type of invoice, what is accounting entry, from where system will take, okay, how it will take, what where we have controls or specification and default. Those points are very important for us. Okay, so we'll discuss about accounting entries, and we'll talk about interfaces and base tables, and a very important point is reports. Okay, interfaces and do integrations. Okay, so theoretically first you will be understanding these three invoice types. What are the various invoice types we have, in which business scenario we will be using the type, in the same way payment types, and we have many concepts in payables, which generally companies will do the same, how to record and which scenario what exactly we'll discuss theoretically. Once we're done with these 3 points theoretically, we'll start working on one by one, very detailed level, the specific setups, etc, etc. Okay, so this sequence will proceed. Now for now what I'll do is, uh, first I'll explain about invoice types and payment types. After completing this, we'll complete the AP setups. Okay, AP basic setups. Advanced setups and all we'll be doing, because we have AP concepts, scenarios. When you're working on that, we'll be doing all the advanced setups, AP basic setups. We'll discuss about invoice types and the payment types, then we'll complete the AP basic setups. Once these setups are ready or done, then we can start working on the invoice creation and the payment process. We'll test all the scenarios, including the P2P cycle. Okay, first I'll show you how to create one invoice and one payment AP. Then we'll start with the requisition, purchase order, receipt, and purchase returns, and automatically how to create invoice based on the PO and receipt, and two-way matching, three-way matching, four-way matching, everything. Before we start with the process, theoretically I'll be explaining the 4 matches, two-way, three-way, four-way, and all will do it. Okay, and we'll be adding few more points also here. Okay, now first we'll talk about invoice types. Just make a note to just list out those types. I'll be writing here, then we'll discuss one by one. Say standard invoice, debit memo. Say debit memo invoice, simply call as debit memo. It's invoice only, everything is invoice only. Okay, debit memo, debit memo. Take short names also. This we call as CM, and this we call as DM. Okay, debit memo. And other point is we have other invoice types called as mixed invoice, and prepayment invoice, say interest invoice, withholding invoice, recurring invoice, expense report invoice. Take in this way, we'll discuss expense report invoice, say retainage release invoice, so payment request, and transportation invoice. Standard debit memo, credit mixed invoice, prepayment, interest, withholding, recurring, expense report invoice, release, and mostly these are the different type of invoice we have. I don't think so something is missing. Almost these. If anything is there, anyway, we'll be covering and all. I think these are the invoice types here. Okay. Standard invoice, debit memo, credit memo, mixed invoice, prepayment invoice, interest invoice, withholding, say withholding tax invoice. I'd like written as withholding invoice, withholding tax invoice, and the recurring invoice, expense report invoice, retainer release invoice, payment request, and transportation invoice. These are the different type of invoices we have in the payables. For every invoice type got different purpose and different business cases will be using it. Okay, clear, right? So all are very simple. Okay, so first we'll talk about standard invoice. It's very simple. When you purchase some material or when you take some service from the supplier, supplier will be sending the invoice, right?
Yes.
That supplier invoice will be recording in the system as a standard invoice. Simple point. Against the purchases, okay, against the purchase, or else a supplier invoice will be recording in the system as a standard invoice. You have to understand what exactly, then you can make your own definitions. It's very simple. Okay, supplier invoice will record in the system as a standard invoice. Or say against the purchases we create standard invoice. Against purchase means when you do some purchases, for that purchasing activity whatever we have to pay, by addressing that we'll create the standard invoice. Okay, when you buy the goods or when you render the services, supplier will be sending the invoice. That invoice only will be creating in the system as a standard invoice. Simple point. Okay, let me take simple example here. Say I created standard invoice with 10,000. A simple example. I created standard invoice with 10,000. Reason, say I purchased some goods. I purchased goods from the supplier. Supplier given the invoice for 10,000. I recorded in the system the same 10,000. Okay. Now invoice I created and everything's done. So now the case is, simple example is, I purchased 5 quantity of item. Okay, each quantity unit price is 1,000. Sorry, 2,000. Let me take it this way. 2,000. So invoice amount should be 10,000. That's what the background. Okay. So I purchased 5 items, 5 quantity of items. Okay, and each unit price, generally we call it price, unit price for each. Okay, 2,000. So total invoice amount is 10,000. Okay, we purchase. After purchasing, what happened? I purchased. I received the 5 quantity, and I created invoice in the system. After that, identified one quantity condition is not good, so damaged. Whatever I purchased, something got damaged. Now I want to return. I want to return. So if I want to return, still I should not maintain the liability. See, standard invoice means we are recording how much we have to pay to the supplier. This 10,000 we can say liability or liability to supplier. We have to pay. Simply you can say supplier liability. Supplier liability is nothing but how much we are liable. Okay, take the term as supplier liability. This is supplier liability. That means we have to pay 10,000. Now what we are going to do? We are going to return one quantity. One quantity is equal to 2,000. Now what we have to do? The system still you should not maintain as a 10,000. You have to reduce accordingly, right? See, after again you will be replacing and all. That's a different thing. Okay, let's try to understand these points. So you are going to return one quantity. If you are going to return one quantity, still you have to show in your system you have to pay 10,000. What you have to do? 8,000 only. For that, what we have to do? We have to reduce 2,000. What reason we are reducing? Purchase returns. Yeah, damage, correct. Purchase returns. Because we are going to do the returns, that is the reason we are going to reduce the invoice amount. Or else you say we are going to reduce the supplier liability. Okay, fine. So or else you can say we are going to reduce the outstanding amount. In other terms, you can say whatever you have to pay to the supplier, the amount you can say open item. Item is nothing but, don't look just inventory item, not open item means the open value, something like that. Everything you can call the invoice which you have to pay, which is not yet paid. You can say open invoice. Just make a note also. What we call unpaid invoice, we can call as open invoice. Unpaid invoice we call as open invoice. Okay, unpaid invoice we call as open invoice. Okay, done. So here simple point is we have like 10,000 outstanding, but we return one quantity of the material.
Purchase returns.
Yeah, one quantity of the item we return, purchase returns. So now the case is, because of purchase returns, we have to reduce 2,000 from supplier liability. We have to reduce 2,000 supplier liability, okay, from the open invoice because of purchase returns. With reason of purchase returns, if you want to reduce the invoice amount means always think open invoice amount only, okay, with the reason of, okay, in case of purchase returns, if you want to reduce invoice amount or else supplier liability, we use debit memo. Take that point. Case is only one, fixed purchase returns. In case of purchase returns, okay, in case of purchase returns, to reduce the
Supplier liability.
supplier liability, we can use debit memo. In case of purchase returns, to reduce the supplier liability, we can use debit memo invoice type. In case of purchase returns, okay, in case of purchase returns, to reduce the supplier liability, we use debit memo. Okay, 1 second, seems to there is some network issue here.